Grief is a mountain. Some men try to climb it, others try to tunnel through it, but Silas had simply become it. He had let its granite silence seep into his bones, let its glacial stillness settle in his heart. For 5 years, the mountain had been his only companion, its seasons the only rhythm he acknowledged. He was a large man, built of the same hard materials as his home, his mass a physical manifestation of the sorrow he carried. His exile was a penance, a quiet agreement with the ghosts of a wife and son that he would feel nothing but the cold bite of the wind and the ache of solitude until he, too, returned to the earth. The cabin he inhabited was less a home than a den, a place of hibernation from a world that had taken everything. His hands, thick and calloused, knew the language of wood and stone, of axe and plough, but had forgotten the touch of another human being. He spoke only to the emptiness, and the emptiness, in its vast indifference, never spoke back. This hermitage was broken only twice a year by a reluctant descent into the grimy outpost town that clung to the mountain's feet like a fungus. It was a necessary evil, a brief and jarring return to the world of men for salt, flour, and kerosene. It was on one such trip, with the autumn air already sharp with the promise of a brutal winter, that he saw them. 3 children, huddled together on the splintered porch of the town warden's office, looking like a trio of sparrows fallen from a nest. They were thin, their faces smudged with a dirt that seemed etched into their skin, their eyes holding a weary hollowness that did not belong in the young. The townspeople flowed around them, an indifferent river parting around 3 small, unwanted stones. No one met their gaze. No one offered a word. They were ghosts already, and Silas, a man well acquainted with ghosts, felt a tremor in the tectonic plates of his grief. It was not pity, not yet. It was a terrible, unwelcome recognition. He saw the shape of their loneliness, and it was a perfect mirror of his own. The town warden was a sour man whose spirit had long since curdled. He spat a stream of brown tobacco juice near Silas's worn boots. Orphans, he grunted, as if the word itself were an affliction. Parents took a fever. No kin. The parish is full. He looked at the 3 children with undisguised contempt, as if their very existence was a personal inconvenience. Costing the town to feed him, Silas stood there, a silent monolith of a man, the scent of pine and cold stone clinging to him. He looked from the warden's bitter face to the children. The oldest, a boy, met his gaze with a defiant glare that was too brittle to be real. It was the armor of fear. The middle child, a girl, stared at her own bare feet, her small shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. The youngest, another girl, was a phantom, her face obscured by a curtain of matted hair, seemingly not there at all. Silas knew nothing of children. He was a creature of solitude, his life pared down to the essential, brutal mechanics of survival. Yet, the sight of them being appraised like unwanted livestock stirred something dormant and dangerous within him. "I'll take them," he heard himself say, the words tasting like rust in his mouth. The warden blinked, then laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You? Up on that rock? What for?" Silas didn't answer. He simply reached into the leather pouch at his belt. The warden's eyes narrowed, a flicker of avarice in their depths. "There's a wardship fee," he lied smoothly. "To make it official. $5, it was a paltry sum, an insult disguised as bureaucracy, the price of 3 human lives deemed worthless. Silas laid the coins on the warped wooden railing. They did not clink, they landed with a dead, final thud. The journey back up the mountain was a silent ordeal. The children followed 10 paces behind him, a small, frightened constellation orbiting a dark and distant star. The boy, Finn, held a rock in one hand. The middle girl, Ilara, held the hand of the youngest, Kala. Silas did not look back. He could feel their terror as keenly as the weight of the sack on his shoulders. He was a giant, an unknown quantity, and he was leading them away from the only world they knew, into a wilderness that promised nothing but hardship. When they reached the cabin, he pushed open the door and stood aside. Inside, the fire was banked, its low orange glow a single point of warmth in the encroaching twilight. He gestured for them to enter. They hesitated, then scurried past him like mice, pressing themselves into the farthest, darkest corner, a single, trembling entity. He set about his routine, stoking the fire, slicing bread, and setting 3 bowls of stew on the floor, then retreated to his own side of the hearth. He did not speak. He did not watch them. He simply created a space for them and waited. The first winter was a siege. The snow came early and stayed late, burying the world in a shroud of white silence. The cabin became their entire universe, a small wooden ark adrift on a frozen sea. Inside, the silence was of a different kind. It was thick with mistrust and grief, a living thing that breathed in the spaces between them. Silas spoke only when necessary, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the very logs of the walls. He would say, before heading into the blizzard. Waterleap the children remained a closed circle. Finn was the sentinel, his small body a constant barrier between his sisters and the giant in the room. He ate with a furtive quickness, his eyes never leaving Silas. Elara was the caregiver, ensuring her younger sister ate first, her movements precise and pragmatic. And Calla? Calla was a ghost. She moved without sound, ate without appetite, and never, ever looked up. Her world was contained in the floorboards at her feet. Communication was a language of action. Silas would leave mended boots by the door. In the morning, they would be gone. He would place a bowl of broth on the hearth, it would be empty an hour later. He chopped wood until his muscles screamed, hunted until his face was numb with cold, his every action a silent vow of provision. He was not offering comfort, for he had none to give. He was offering survival. He was offering the simple, profound fact of the next day. One evening, the firelight danced and the wind howled a lonely hymn outside. Elara was trying to comb the tangles from Calla's hair. The child flinched, pulling away, and the back of her thin chemise rode up her back. For a single, stark moment, the firelight caught on her skin. Silas froze, the knife he was sharpening held motionless in his hand. Her back was a canvas of pale, raised scars. They were not the chaotic marks of an accident or a whip. They were deliberate, geometric, a horrifying tracery of lines and circles that formed a pattern he could not comprehend. It was a brand. A signature of some unspeakable cruelty. He saw Elara quickly pull the fabric down, her hands trembling. Finn shot him a look of pure, venomous hatred, as if Silas himself had carved the marks. Silas looked away, his gaze falling into the heart of the fire. The image was burned into his mind. He did not ask. He did not speak. He simply added this new, terrible weight to the silence between them, another stone in the foundation of their fragile, broken world. The mystery of it settled in the cabin, a fourth ghost to sit with them by the hearth through the long, dark nights. When the world began to thaw, so too did something within the cabin's walls. The sun, a long-absent stranger, reappeared, its weak light filtering through the grimy windowpane. The oppressive weight of the endless snow began to lift, and with it, the suffocating tension. Silas started to move his work outdoors, tanning hides, repairing his fishing nets, preparing a small plot of earth for planting. The children, drawn by a tentative curiosity, began to venture out of the cabin, blinking in the pale sunlight. They watched him from a safe distance, small shadows at the edge of his world. He decided, without conscious thought, to teach them. He didn't use words. He used his hands. He beckoned Finn over one morning, pressing a small, dull hunting knife into the boy's palm. He then took his own knife and showed Finn how to read the tracks of a snowshoe hare, how to set a simple snare, how to move silently through the budding forest. The boy was a reluctant student at first, his movements stiff with suspicion. But the primal need to learn, to be capable, eventually won out. A quiet pride began to replace the fear in Finn's eyes as he started to contribute, leaving a snared rabbit by the door, a small but significant offering. To Elara, he gave a packet of seeds and a hoe. He showed her how to break the hard soil, how to feel its readiness, how to bury the seeds like tiny promises. He taught her which wild greens were safe to eat, which roots held nourishment. She was a natural, her small hands patient and sure. She became the keeper of their future sustenance, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tended her small garden with fierce devotion. Calla remained an enigma. She would sit on a nearby stump, a silent observer to her siblings' education. She offered no interest in the hunt or the garden. Silas, feeling a strange and unfamiliar pang, spent an evening carving a piece of scrap pine. His large, clumsy-looking fingers moved with surprising delicacy, whittling and shaping until the wood became a small, smooth bird. The next day, he placed it on the stump where she always sat. She stared at it for a long time, her expression unreadable. She did not touch it. Disappointment, an emotion he thought he had buried long ago, pricked at him. But later that night, as the children slept in their pile of blankets by the fire, he saw it. The wooden bird was clutched tightly in Cala's small hand, held to her chest like a precious secret. A crack appeared in the granite of his heart. Summer descended on the mountain like a warm, green blessing. The world was alive with the buzz of insects and the scent of wildflowers, and life within the cabin found a new, steadier rhythm. The days were long and filled with shared work, a silent choreography of survival that was slowly, imperceptibly, becoming the dance of a family. Finn, no longer a boy playing at defiance, was now a hunter. He moved through the woods with a quiet confidence that mirrored Silas's own, his contributions to their larder a source of unspoken pride that straightened his spine and hardened the set of his jaw. He no longer watched Silas with suspicion, but with a student's critical eye, and sometimes, something akin to respect. Ilara's garden flourished under her diligent care. She was the mistress of their stores, her pragmatism a grounding force. She learned to preserve, to dry, to plan, her small face a mask of seriousness as she calculated how many jars of wild berries they would need for the winter. She was the anchor, the one who ensured today's bounty would last until tomorrow. And Cala began to emerge from her cocoon of silence. She still did not speak, but she began to communicate. She would leave small, beautiful arrangements of stones and flowers on the doorstep. She took to drawing in the dirt with a stick, her fingers tracing intricate, swirling patterns that echoed the terrible marks on her back. Silas watched her, a knot of grief and anger tightening in his chest. He saw not just the scars, but the ghost of an artist's hand, a spirit that had been brutalized but not broken. The cabin was no longer just a shelter, it was a home. The hearth was its heart, the shared meals its sacrament. One afternoon, Silas was mending a tear in his heavy coat, his large fingers fumbling with the needle. Ilara came over, took it wordlessly from his hand, and stitched the seam with small, perfect stitches. It was a simple gesture, but it was everything. A few weeks later, a summer storm rolled in, and Silas slipped on the wet rocks near the stream, his leg twisting awkwardly beneath him. A sharp cry of pain escaped his lips. Before he could even register what had happened, Finn was at his side. "Careful," the boy said. It was the first word he had ever spoken to him. The word was not just a warning, it was an admission. It was the acknowledgement of a bond, a fragile thread of concern woven in the quiet loom of their shared existence. Silas looked at the boy, then at the two girls hurrying towards them, their faces etched with alarm, and felt the foundations of his mountain of grief begin to tremble, threatening to give way to something new and terrifyingly hopeful. Autumn arrived, painting the mountainside in hues of fire and gold. A sense of urgency settled over their small homestead. This was the season of preparation, the race against the coming cold. But this year, the work was different. It was not the desperate struggle of a lone man, nor the fearful toil of a man and his wards. It was the concerted effort of a unit, a family moving with a shared purpose. They worked from sunup to sundown, their movements overlapping in a practiced rhythm. Silas and Finn felled trees, the synchronized bite of their axes echoing through the valley. They stacked the wood in a massive wall against the cabin, a bulwark against the winter. Ilara was in constant motion, harvesting the last of the vegetables from her garden, smoking fish Finn caught in the stream, and arranging herbs to dry from the rafters. The cabin filled with the rich, earthy smells of sustenance and security. Cala, their silent shadow, gathered kindling, her small arms always full, her eyes always watchful. The fear that had been a constant presence was gone, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. They were a tribe of four, bound not by blood, but by the shared crucible of survival and the slow, patient forging of trust. Yet, as the days grew shorter and the air sharper, a disquieting shadow fell upon Silas. It was the ghost of his own past. He had built this life on the mountain to escape the man he used to be, to build a fortress against the memories of the foreman whose greed and cruelty had led to the mine collapse that took his wife and son. He had run, burying his rage and guilt under layers of solitude. Now, looking at the children, at the life they were building, he felt the old anger stirring. He saw in Kala's scars a reflection of the same casual brutality that had destroyed his world. The injustice of it was a bitter poison. One afternoon, while tracking a buck on a high ridge, he saw him. A lone figure, far below at the edge of the tree line, watching the cabin through a spyglass. The man was too far away to see clearly, but Silas didn't need to. He knew the posture of that kind of predator. It was a man from the town, from the world they had left behind. The sight sent a chill colder than any autumn wind through him. The outside world had not forgotten them. It was watching. And waiting. The mountain no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a perch, exposed and vulnerable. The peace they had so carefully constructed was a fragile thing, and he realized with a dreadful certainty that the winter they were preparing for was not the only storm on the horizon. The storm broke with a fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. A blizzard descended, erasing the world in a blinding curtain of snow and wind. For days, they were prisoners in the cabin, the howl of the gale their only music. The forced confinement frayed their nerves, the small space shrinking around them. Kala was the most affected. She grew agitated, pacing the floorboards, her small hands twisting in the fabric of her dress. She refused to eat. She would stare into the fire for hours, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed to be bubbling up from a deep and poisoned well. On the third night of the storm, the tension reached its peak. Kala let out a small, strangled cry and collapsed onto the hearth, her body trembling. Ilara and Finn rushed to her side, their faces pale with worry. Silas felt a surge of helpless panic. He knew this was not a physical ailment. The storm outside was echoing a storm inside her. Suddenly, Kala pushed her siblings away. She crawled to the fire, grabbed a blackened piece of charcoal from the edge of the hearth, and turned to the wide, smooth planks of the floor. Her hand began to move, at first shakily, then with a feverish, desperate certainty. She was drawing. She sketched the strange, geometric pattern that marred her back, the lines and circles rendered with terrifying precision in the flickering firelight. But she didn't stop there. The pattern became the center of something larger. She drew lines branching from it, symbols and shapes that looked like tunnels, rock formations, and veins of ore. Finn and Ilara watched, mesmerized and horrified. Silas knelt, his heart pounding against his ribs. He was not looking at a child's frantic scribbling. He was looking at a map. The north vein, Finn whispered, his voice cracking. He pointed to a section of the drawing. "Father, he found it. He said it was a secret. He said it would be for us." The truth crashed down upon Silas with the force of an avalanche. The warden hadn't sold them for $5 because they were worthless. He had sold them to him, the mountain recluse, to get them out of the way. The scars on Kala's back were not random cruelty. They were a map, branded into the flesh of a silent child by a man who wanted what their father had found. And Silas now knew, with a certainty that froze his blood, who that man was. The watcher at the tree line. The cruel foreman from the mines. The ghost from his own past, now come to haunt his present. Her scars were not just a map to a silver vein, they were a map that led directly back to the man who had destroyed Silas's first family, and now threatened to destroy his second. The charcoal map on the floor lay between them, a declaration of war. The howling of the wind outside was no longer just a storm, it was an omen. In that moment, Silas saw the path of his life laid bare. He had fled to the mountain to grieve, but he had only been hiding. He had walled himself in with his sorrow, believing it was a monument to his lost family. He saw now that it was a cage. The foreman, a man named Brand, was a nexus of evil, a dark star whose gravity had pulled both of Silas's lives into a collision course. He had taken Silas's wife and son through his greed. He had tortured these children for the same reason. This was not a coincidence. This was a reckoning. The mountain had not been a tomb after all. It had been a training ground. For 5 years, he had honed himself against the stone and the cold, becoming something hard and unforgiving. He had thought it was a way to die slowly, but perhaps it had been a way to become the weapon he needed to be. A profound and terrible calm settled over him. The choice was simple. He could run again, take the children deeper into the wilderness, and spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. Or he could stand his ground. He could turn his mountain of grief into a fortress of defiance. He looked at Finn's face, tight with a mixture of fear and a boy's desperate yearning to be a man. He looked at Ilara, her practical mind already calculating their odds, her hand resting protectively on her sister's shoulder. He looked at Kala, whose small body was a testament to the world's cruelty, and whose spirit, against all odds, had survived. They were not his wards. They were his children. This was his family. And Brand would not have them. He stood up, the movement decisive. He walked to the old sea chest in the corner, the one he hadn't opened in 5 years. The hinges groaned in protest. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was his old rifle. He lifted it out. The children watched, their eyes wide. But there was no fear in their gaze now. There was only understanding. He began to clean the rifle with slow, deliberate movements. The scent of gun oil filled the cabin, a sharp, metallic smell that cut through the scent of wood smoke. It was the smell of a promise. Finn, seeing his intent, went to the woodpile and picked up the small axe. He began to sharpen the ends of several thick branches, his jaw set. Ilara went to the windows, testing the shutters, finding ways to brace the door. They moved without words, a silent, unified force preparing for the inevitable. The ghosts of the past would not be exorcised by hiding. They would be faced. Here, on this mountain. In this home. The snow stopped. A fragile, pristine silence fell over the world, broken only by the drip of melting icicles. It was the calm before the battle. They arrived 2 days later, 3 figures dark against the snow, their approach arrogant and certain. Brand was in the lead, a stout, cruel-looking man with a face like a slab of raw meat. The 2 men with him were cut from the same ragged cloth, hired muscle with empty eyes. Silas met them on the porch, his rifle held loosely in one hand. He was no longer just a large man, he was a guardian, a bulwark of flesh and bone standing between his family and the snarling world. Silas, Brand sneered, his voice oily with false familiarity. Still hiding up here, I see. I've come for my property. He gestured towards the cabin door, behind which the children were hidden. The brats. And the map their thieving father stole from me. Silas's voice, when it came, was the low grind of rock on rock. They're not your property. And there's nothing for you here. Leave. Brand laughed. I don't think so. That little mute has the location of the north vein on her back. I put it there myself. She belongs to me. At the word mute, a flicker of pure, cold rage ignited in Silas's chest. He raised the rifle, the click of the hammer being cocked unnaturally loud in the frozen air. Last chance. Brand. The standoff was broken not by a gunshot, but by a sound from the woods to their left, a sharp crack of a branch. One of Brand's men turned, distracted. It was Finn, a diversion. As the man took a step into the trees, a rope snare, one of the first things Silas had taught the boy to make, whipped up, catching his ankle and hoisting him upside down, shouting in surprise and rage. At the same time, Ilara, from the side of the cabin, launched a volley of small, hard rocks with a sling, peppering the second man's face. He cursed, stumbling back, momentarily blinded. It was all the opening Silas needed. He moved with a speed that defied his size, not with the rifle, but with his hands. He brought the butt of the gun down on the second man's shoulder, disabling him, then turned to face Brand. The fight was short, brutal, and primal. Brand was a brawler, used to instilling fear, but Silas was something else entirely. He was a force of nature. He fought with the fury of a father defending his young. He absorbed Brand's wild punches as if they were raindrops, and his own blows landed with the weight of granite. He did not kill him. Killing him would be an ending, and this was not about an ending. This was about a statement. He drove Bran to his knees in the snow, his face bloody, his arrogance shattered. "You will never come back here," Silas growled, his voice a low tremor of absolute authority. "You will forget they exist. You will forget this mountain. If I ever see you again, I will bury you on it." He then dragged the man and his groaning thugs to the edge of his land and sent them stumbling back down the mountain, broken and defeated. The three men disappeared into the trees, leaving only their ragged tracks in the snow. The silence that returned was different. It was clean. The air tasted of pine and cold, pure freedom. The shadow that had loomed over them was gone, banished not by hiding, but by standing together. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, a warm and steady heartbeat. The charcoal map had been scrubbed from the floor, its purpose served, its dark power erased. Finn was cleaning the small axe with a quiet pride, Ilara was calmly putting away her sling, and Calla was sitting by the hearth, watching the flames dance. The violent climax had not broken them, it had sealed them. They were no longer refugees bound by circumstance. They were a family, forged in fire and ice, their loyalty tested and proven. Silas came back inside, his knuckles bruised, his body aching, but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. He looked at the three of them, at the fierce, beautiful resilience in their young faces, and the mountain of grief inside him finally, completely, crumbled. It washed away in a silent, cathartic release, leaving in its place not an emptiness, but a vast, fertile ground ready for new growth. He sat down heavily in his chair, the weariness of the last 5 years settling on him. Calla stood up. She walked over to him, her steps no longer silent and ghostly, but sure and deliberate. She stood before him, looking up into his face. For the first time, he saw her eyes clearly, and they were not full of fear or shadow, but a profound and gentle wisdom. She reached out a small hand and placed it on his bruised one. Then, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, unused, but clear as a mountain spring. Silas, it was just his name. But in that single word, there was a universe of meaning. It was forgiveness. It was acceptance. It was home. Spring arrived again on the mountain, not as a tentative promise, but as a joyous certainty. The four of them were in the garden, turning the rich, dark earth. Ilara directed the planting, Finn dug the holes, and Silas dropped in the seeds. Calla walked behind them, watering the newly sown rows. The scars on her back were still there, visible beneath her thin shirt as she bent over. But they were no longer a map to a hidden treasure, nor a brand of ownership. They were just old marks on new skin, a part of the story of how a wounded giant and 3 lost children found each other on a lonely mountain and became a family. They were a reminder that the deepest wounds can become the foundation of the strongest love.